Hey guys, thanks for joining me here. Yeah, my name's Andre, and I'm privileged to talk about a pretty sweet industry today, which is esports. So, for the better part of a decade, I've been involved in this industry in lots of different ways. Everything from being a competitor, a streamer. Um, these days focusing more on the production side of things and game design. It's a pretty interesting industry, whether you're a gamer or not, because it's really come to its own in the past few years, and it's kind of at this interesting intersection of tech, media, interactive entertainment, and there's a lot to learn from it, I think, when it comes to, really any startup or any kind of emerging media business. So today I'm going to talk about what is an esport, who's watching them, how they make money, and the future of the industry and kind of where things are going. I'm just going to kind of jump right into it and go from there. So I'm going to start by answering the question, what is an esport? And even when I speak at startup conferences where every single person in the audience works in the industry, I still like to answer this question because there's a lot of confusion about what an esport is. You see, for better or worse, esports as an industry checks a lot of boxes that investors look for. It's a new emerging market. There's a huge audience size. It's really a fledgling industry. And because of that, it's become a bit of a buzzword when it comes to raising capital. So, no matter what kind of business you want to start, pitching investors is a big part of that, and raising capital is a big part of that. So what we're seeing is a lot of companies that aren't really related to esports kind of throwing it into their pitches. It's created a lot of confusion about what an esport really is. So the way I define an esport is structured competitive gaming. Structured meaning maybe there's like a league of some sort, or maybe some sort of set tournament schedule. And competitive gaming meaning, not Candy Crush Saga or whatever. It has to be a game with high skill ceiling and a bit of a history behind it in terms of the players and the events and all of that. And this is something that I think is really important to define because, for better or worse, the word esports get confused with a lot of gaming content, which is also a booming industry, but a very different thing, right? So if PewDiePie on YouTube is playing a game, that's not esports content, but if you're watching a tournament with a lot of prize money on the line, players that practice this game full time, that's more of what I talk about when I mention esports. And I'm going to go over kind of all these different markets in a little bit. So the industry's actually been around for a pretty long time, depending on how you see it. And you could look back to the 80s even, the era of arcade machines and Street Fighter being played. Street Fighter to this day is actually a pretty big esport. It's a high growth rate industry. The community is really, really passionate about it. It's mostly a younger demographic, but they are just so incredibly engaged in this media. The average viewer on live streaming platforms or esports platforms like Twitch actually watches longer than they do Netflix on average. So the gaming industry and the esports industries are very intertwined and related, but they are different. So gaming is a massive industry. 40 billion in North America, it does 152 billion globally. That number's been growing year over year, just very consistently for decades. The audience is massive too. Now, esports, in comparison, is actually a much smaller industry. Esports this year, or rather in 2019, just did slightly more than $1 billion. So, relative to the size of the gaming industry, it's night and day. Right? Gaming industry is very established. Esports is a very small but quickly growing new market that's kind of emerging. So, I want to talk about Twitch because this is really the platform that, allowed esports to come into its own over the past few years. So Twitch is a company that got acquired by Amazon back in 2016, I believe. This is actually where I started as a content creator back in 2012. It was the first year the website launched. And It's a really cool thing. I mean, the way that I explain the website to my mom is basically by saying, Twitch is like YouTube but live. But that really doesn't do it justice, because what Twitch really is the first mainstream interactive entertainment platform. And I'll get into that more at the end of the speech if I have time. But in general, it's just important to note, the website's absolutely massive. I think it's number 4 in the world in terms of just raw data and raw traffic that goes through it. In terms of just how much data flows through, I think only Netflix, Google, and Amazon are above it. And it's growing every day. So gaming content creators are people that oftentimes get conflated with esports players and fans, but it's also a very important part of the industry to understand. Because while esports has been growing, so has gaming content. I'm sure a lot of you have seen YouTubers popping up and really becoming multimillionaires overnight just on the back of gaming content. It's because this market is just so massive among young people right now. And it's only trending upwards. It's only growing faster and faster every day. So YouTube is absurdly big. Actually, that's the one I forgot to list. YouTube's actually, I think, number 2 in terms of data, or number 1. But yeah, absolutely massive. I don't have to explain how big YouTube is, but gaming's always been a massive category for the website. Like I said, this is how some of the biggest creators on the site, like PewDiePie, got their start, was with gaming content. And gamers, as usual, are the early adopters of just about everything. So, even if we look back to like cell phones, what was the first mobile handheld device that everybody had in their pocket? It's a Game Boy in the 90s, long before cell phones had mass adoption. Websites like Twitch, again, it's this interactive media platform, but the gamers just happen to find it first. Because these people are tech savvy, they're young, and they're really passionate about the few things that they like, which, in this case is gaming. So some examples of, I've talked a lot about what an esport isn't. Well, let me talk about what an esport is. There's actually quite a few of them. So League of Legends, Counter-Strike, and Overwatch are 3 great examples, all of which have kind of different philosophies in how they operate their leagues. So some of these games, they operate a lot like a soccer, or like a football league in Europe. Others operate more, or in the case of Overwatch, it operates more like the NFL, or like an American, like MLB, like a franchise league that's closed off. No teams get relegated or anything. And then Counter-Strike is completely decentralized. There's no big league running everything. It's a lot of third parties hosting their own tournaments all around the world. And the developer just gives anybody, a free license to create events around their game, and that's been really successful for them. Between the 3, I'm actually a fan of Counter-Strike's model the most, but they've all been pretty successful. So I kind of want to go over who's watching, these games, because I think it is an important thing to go over. So the audience is pretty male-heavy right now, but it is becoming more and more gender-neutral over time. When I started in the industry back in 2012, I think Twitch was something like 90 or 95% male viewers. It's coming down to like 73. It's becoming more globally adopted. The viewers are pretty young. What we're seeing is that when kids are very young, basically before the age of 14 or 15, they're really into YouTube exclusively. And then after YouTube, they kind of graduate into watching Twitch, and they want that more interactive experience, something a little bit more hands-on, which esports can provide them. So I kind of want to talk about how esports make money, because this is a bit of the unanswered question for a lot of folks right now. And the honest answer I can give here is that the developer always makes the money. Now, in a traditional sport, nobody owns soccer, nobody owns football. Anybody can host a league for these games. But in esports, it's very different, because The platform that you're competing on is a video game that somebody owns the IP for, the IP that somebody spent millions of dollars developing. And these publishers really want to protect that IP, and they want to make sure that they're maximizing profits from it. So we see companies like Valve, EA, Blizzard, Activision, and Riot all having a little bit of different philosophies around how they let the esports community treat their game. So in the case of Valve, for example, they have a very, I don't know what word to use for it, very, I guess, enlightened philosophy of esports, where they see esports as something that's purely additive. That was a lot of fog. Purely additive for their game. So what Valve wants to do is basically say, hey, anybody can run our tournaments. We don't want to take a cut of any of this. Whatever you're doing just helps market our game. These other publishers have been a lot more aggressive about wanting to control the entire ecosystem. In the case of Activision, for example, they were selling franchise slots in their league for $20 and then $40 million a piece, in order to get a permanent slot in that league, where Activision Blizzard, which is one company now, really control the entire ecosystem. Within the esports industry, we've seen a lot of teams pop up. And a team is basically like a soccer club for gamers, where different players are scouted around the world, they're picked up, they get flown either to America or Europe or wherever it is that they need to be competing. They get a sports visa from the country, and lots of teams have popped up, and this is actually maybe the most diversified type of business within the industry. So all these teams have very different philosophies on how they operate, even though they compete in the same titles. And it's kind of the beauty of esports. It's you have a lot of flexibility, right? You're not beholden to one game or one type of marketing strategy. There's a lot of ways to go about it. So when it comes to traditional sports, if I have a team like the Lakers or Real Madrid, they're only competing in the one game that they're known for. But an esports team will compete in dozens of different games. And this is kind of a very unique thing to our industry, where a team like Tempo, for example, my team, we have 31 active players, which is quite a bit when one game requires 5 at most. But yeah, I kind of want to go over how teams make money, because this is something where we've really started to see a lot of developments lately. And I think once third-party companies that don't directly own the game, once these types of companies start making money, that's when the ecosystem really becomes much healthier and starts growing much more quickly. So the most common approach we've seen when it comes to monetizing the esports industry from a team perspective, it's always sponsorships. It's always a big part of it. But merchandising is one that's really been growing lately, because there's been a lot of overlap between the young esports audience and kind of the hype beast, fashion savvy kind of crowd. So we've seen a lot of crossovers with certain teams and major fashion labels, or teams that are doing forced scarcity models like Supreme, trying to sell a lot of product. And this is the way that a lot of teams have begun trying to monetize their product. So Tempo, our company, takes a bit of a different philosophy, right? We think that when people focus on the growth of esports, they're kind of missing the forest for the trees, if that makes sense. So we think that the reason esports has grown is because interactive entertainment is growing. And we think that these esports fans are just the young tech-savvy crowd that happen to be the early adopters of interactive media. So we think that esports is just the first sign of a much larger trend in entertainment, where we're moving away from the days of entertainment being packaged into this one box like a VHS tape and sent one way. Now it's all about interactive broadcasting and two-way entertainment. So what I mean by that is, if we think back to 20, 30,000 years ago, the way that we naturally entertain ourselves, it was always interactive. We'd sit around a campfire together, cook something over a fire, we'd talk to the person next to us, we'd drink together, we danced to the rain god. Everything entertainment related within the tribe was always interactive. And around the time that radio and TV became popularized, entertainment transitioned into a one-way flow of information. It no longer became interactive. You would sit on a couch and information would flow from your TV to you, but you wouldn't be able to send any information back. It became very non-interactive. So with the growth of Twitch, we're really coming full circle to where, I'm watching this broadcaster, they're entertaining me, but then I can talk to the person on camera and he'll respond to me. And it's a much more engaging, interactive experience. And this is really where esports has taken off, because esports grew on these types of platforms where it was inherently interactive. It's not like turning on a TV and watching a basketball game with a different game. Instead it became more about turning on a game and then talking with thousands of other people in chat, heckling the players or making little inside jokes. Sometimes the commentators would respond to what people in chat are saying. So, what we really see as the future of esports is really the future of interactive entertainment. So, what we've been focusing on is, not just the esports and the competition side of things, but also the non-gaming live stream content. We have a travel show we just launched last month. It's a lot like Anthony Bourdain, but live, where the audience is, picking things off the menu in a travel show format. We're actually making our first game, so we're kind of coming full circle into, becoming the publisher. What we found esports teams are very good at is just being a marketing tool and really good at driving downloads to games. So we really think we have the distribution for that, and this is kind of a different approach because, we're not treating ourselves as a sports team that's trying to monetize in the back of our fan base. Instead, we're treating ourselves as more of an interactive media company. And what we want to do is own the IP to the game, to the content that we create. We want to package that and sell it to platforms. This is kind of where I want to get into the future of esports, because it really is, this is something that very few people agree on in the industry, because there's a lot to think about and argue when it I'm actually out of time. I'm trying to think if there's a concise way I can go over this stuff. Well, I'll give you the cliff notes. We think the future of esports is more interactive entertainment. So what I mean by that is, what we've seen today is these big publishers, they put millions of dollars behind a league and they try to make it a sports broadcast with a different game. And what they do when they create that format is they create a one-way flow of information, just like the old TV days. I think that really the path forward in our industry is less about emulating traditional sports, and it's going to be more about paving the way to the future within what's like a natural fit for esports, rather than forcing like an NFL model onto a video game. Anyway, sorry, I tried to cram a lot of info into a very short amount of time. I hope that wasn't too rushed. I know I tried to go over a lot of stuff there. It was probably a cleaner way I could have summarized that. But yeah, I appreciate you guys taking the time to listen. And yeah, I think might have a couple minutes for questions. I'm not sure. But, yeah.
Do you think you're diversifying too far by actually making your own game? I mean, aren't you worried? Like, it seems like as you're growing, right? You said you're trying to expand, you're trying to what is the future? What is this? And you're trying a bit of this, you're trying a bit of that, you're trying quite a lot of number of things. Yeah. Are you also then not worried that Tempo as an organization is, if I'm this interactive media, I mean, aren't you spreading yourself pretty wide? Are you worried that, or is that part,
That's a good question, yeah. So we didn't just say, hey, we're going to make a game and jump into it. What we actually started doing is we started working directly with publishers like Blizzard to promote their games. So they would pay us to do a marketing campaign using a lot of streamers and pro players that we have under our brand to promote their game. And this became a bigger and bigger part of our business starting in 2016. So now we're actually running all of North American marketing for one of the biggest publishers out of Japan for their card game. They just doubled the deal and re-upped for 2020. So we actually
card game or car game?
It was a card game, yeah.
Car.
Card.
Oh,
sorry.
card. Right. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, digital card game. Yeah, like poker or Hearthstone or yeah. So we basically realized, hey, this is becoming a really big part of our business. It doesn't make sense to be the middleman anymore, right? If we have the distribution, we could basically just do the math on like how many downloads we can generate roughly on any given game. Because we've done a lot of these campaigns at this point.
Sure.
It just made a lot of sense to own the product rather than being a middleman.
Right. And I mean, tell us about Bazaar is the name of the game.
Yeah.
Right. What tell us about the game? What sort of game is it?
Yeah, it's a pretty sweet concept. It's an intergalactic marketplace, and the game is all themed around discovery and wonderment. And it's a game where, unlike in a traditional card game where you can copy a deck online and just play it, like in a game like Magic, for example, in our game you have to build a new strategy every game as you play. So every turn you get some options, you buy some cards, you make some choices, and you build a new strategy every time. Yeah.
Okay, so it's a card game, right? Okay, makes
Yeah.
sense. And okay, then the final one is okay. Blizzard and Activision and Riot, they're locking down the fort. We can't get in. You guys are going to make your own game. Are you just going to lock the doors? And what's your plan for when you're a publisher and your game gets a little bit successful?
Yeah, it's a good question. We're still a little torn on how we feel about letting teams into the game. I think there's a lot that certain games gain from having esports teams be a part of their ecosystem. Sure. But there's some games where it's just not a natural fit. So it's something that, look, one common fallacy in esports is that people think they can make an esport. We're not going into this game saying, hey, this is going to be an esport. We're not, if you were to tell me you're going to make baseball 2, it would sound ridiculous, right?
Okay.
It takes time to develop. What we're going to do is just organically support the community, and if it builds over time organically, then that's what we've seen succeed. But when it has to be bottom up. You can't just pour a bunch of money in something and then do a top-down approach and just say I'm making a $100 million league, because it doesn't give you organic followers or an organic audience. There's no shortcuts to building an esport. That's really the takeaway there.
Makes a lot of sense. Very good. Please, round of applause for Andrey. Thank you, sir.
Thanks.